Hi, we are in the Mezrab, in the kitchen, the domain of my father, the place where he made tons and tons and tons of soup, but generally a place where he feels at home. You have to imagine this man who in Iran used to be a society man, a man that everyone knew him, and then suddenly he came to this new culture where his life was slightly more limited. He didn't know so many people, he didn't know the norms, he didn't understand what was going on around him, so he found himself a sultan in his life, a king in his kitchen, where he had control over the elements. Now, what did this look like, this proud man coming to a new culture? You have to imagine this is in the early 80s. We came here in 1983. And in the 80s, Amsterdam was this wild, anarchistic place. And it's in this time when then strapping, moderately young Ali, which is my father, found himself and his family with a tiny little apartment in the center of town, in the Jordan, before it was gentrified. And when he wanted to discover the city, he would just go out next to the canals, and then he would find the landmarks that would guide him back to his house. So he knew canal, he knew church, and promptly he got lost. It's at 4 a.m. that my father was brought back, that first time that he went out to venture, because of course he didn't know that Amsterdam, the city center, it's all canals and churches. And it was two friendly police officers who would have to bring him back and ring the doorbell and ask my mother, "Excuse me, is this man yours?" And yes, she would say, and the door would open and he would come in. It's the same man who also didn't even know when he was making a fool of himself, when he thought he had a nice shirt with a Greek statue who was kind of standing there with this wine pouring out, and only later someone pointed out, after he had been wearing this shirt for a few months, that the English under it actually said "too drunk to fuck," which is a funny haha shirt that you buy on a holiday, but not for a proud Iranian revolutionary who thought he had something classy and Greek. But the image that I wanted to share with you is how this same man, in those years, just after the revolution, in the middle of the Iran-Iraq war, and in the middle of what is probably the biggest, I would say, human rights abuse of the history of Iran, knowing that so many of his friends were being killed in Iran, found himself in the street often thinking about what was happening back there. And of course, if this is what you're thinking about, this is what overflows your lips, right? So this man finds himself in a bar in front of a Dutchman, and he's sharing what he needs to share. He's talking about the revolution. He's talking about the struggle of the people. He's talking about the injustices that are happening in his country. And of course, this Dutchman sees a strapping young Iranian with the mustache that was fashionable among the communists of his generation. And this man is looking and listening with excitement. And at some point tells him, "This is a conversation that we should be having at my place." And my father thinks this is incredibly nice. This is incredibly generous. So he pays for the beers. They walk out. And it's halfway through that conversation that my father realizes that maybe he hasn't been invited to this man's house to talk about the Iranian revolution. So it's at that moment that he says, "Excuse me, I think I might need to go home. I actually recognize my home. It's just there behind that canal." To which the man says, "Home? Why?" "Well, because I have a wife and a child there." And the man says, "So? Well, wife and a child, so I can't go with you?" And he says, "Darling, so many of my lovers have wives and children. What's the problem?" It's a funny image of two people in the 80s who both had their own topics that they needed to converse about. For one, it was the revolution that he had just survived and was still burning in his chest. For the other one, the sexual revolution that was raging through Amsterdam. We now live in a funny time in Amsterdam where all of us with our own topics that we need to discuss have been covered by this one big topic that has silenced all others. And you know what? I hope that soon all of those other topics will be bubbling back again, will be popping back again, and then we will find ourselves, me and you, talking about what you find important and what I find important. And you know what? I won't ask you to change the topic.